Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, war, casualties, and the truth. Iraq and the body count. The South African media go head-to-head with the government over HIV/AIDS and what to do about it. The Spanish talk show that staged a romantic moment. What followed was tragic. And daft hands and dancing fingers. Welcome back. 4.5 years into the Iraq War, and there's a simple question that no one seems able to answer. How many people have been killed? The U.S. media put the figure at around 70,000. But there have been other studies that suggest more than 1 million Iraqis may have died. And it's a measure of how politicized the Iraq story has become that when anyone publishes casualty figures, their methodology and their motivation become part of the story. Our starting point this week, the American academic who says that the U.S. news media are in denial over how many people have been killed in Iraq. Ever since the Iraq War started, the U.S. military has said it doesn't do body counts. It doesn't keep track of Iraqi civilian casualties. So this past Monday, when 30 Iraqis were killed, or the following day, when another 46 lost their lives, the Pentagon did not tally those figures. It leaves that job to others. And the casualty count, and the way the media have reported it, is highly controversial.
It's a matter of enormous regret to us that, in fact, civilian casualty figures have become highly politicized, and there are all kinds of interests at play in either exaggerating or downplaying them.
Iraq Body Count says it has the largest public database of civilian deaths in Iraq. It has used media reports, mostly English language, to arrive at a figure between 77 and 85,000. That method of keeping track, an actual tally, has its critics.
This is a huge underestimate, as everyone would recognize, because it only counts the bodies that can be verified, the deaths that can be verified. But in a war, and especially in Iraq, where the amount of territory where journalists can travel freely is increasingly restricted, this is just a small fraction of the deaths.
The second, more controversial approach is to estimate casualties scientifically. That method relies on random sampling, and its advocates say it provides a much more realistic picture than simply tallying the dead. Random sampling was used by researchers from Johns Hopkins, an American university, in a 2006 survey. They went to 47 Iraqi neighborhoods and into more than 1,800 homes. Their study, published in the UK medical journal The Lancet, said Iraqis reported a death rate of about 2.5%, a finding that, when applied against the entire population, added up to more than 600,000 dead.
We're confident in the methods, we're confident in the data, and we're confident in the analysis of the data. So we very much stand by what our results were as they were originally released in The Lancet in 2006.
According to a study in the online edition of The Lancet, a British medical journal, 654,000 Iraqis have died since the war began, most of them violently.
That estimate, more than 600,000, was more than 10 times higher than the number of confirmed deaths. So the Lancet report got plenty of coverage, at least in the short term. News organizations in the U.S. reported that the Bush administration rejected the study's conclusions.
No, I don't consider it a credible report. Neither does General Casey, and neither do Iraqi officials.
Yet the Bush administration and the U.S. media have accepted casualty estimates based on random sampling before. Case in point, Darfur.
It's the same kind of estimate that we have for example, the deaths in Darfur, which the media accepts. So there's no reason not to take this.
If you go into a metro station in New York, you'll find plastered all over the walls things about Darfur. Okay, Darfur, 200,000 people were killed, and it is a crime against humanity as far as I'm concerned. But they don't have any material to show what happened in Iraq. And then you start, thinking, who's behind this? Who's trying to divert attention from Iraq? And to me, it's like diverting attention from the bigger crime.
Taking their cue from the White House, right-wing bloggers in the U.S. went after the study and the people who published it. They found video of the editor of The Lancet speaking at an anti-war protest in London and posted it on YouTube, saying he was biased.
We now know that the civilian deaths in Iraq and in Afghanistan have been massively under-reported and under-recognized.
The British government, like the Bush administration, called the 600,000 figure an exaggeration. But 5 months later, the BBC reported that British politicians had done that against the advice of their own scientists at the Ministry of Defence.
The government was last year warned by its own chief scientist at the MOD not publicly to criticise a report estimating that 665,000 Iraqis had died due to war. Despite this advice, Downing Street said at the time the figure was not anywhere near accurate.
Then the Lancet study was backed up by another survey. It was published 3 months ago, right at the time that the U.S. commander in Iraq was on Capitol Hill telling Americans how well the surge was going. A British firm called ORB reported that after polling 1,500 Iraqis, it concluded that more than 1 million people had been killed there. Given that almost a year had passed since the Lancet study and that violence in Iraq had increased during that period, the Johns Hopkins researchers said ORB's findings were consistent with theirs.
We have not uncovered anything subsequently that would make us think that the methods or the data collected were not reliable. And these are long established and time-honored methods, so we're fully confident in the methods and in the results.
However, beyond the ongoing arguments over methodology and motivation, there is a pattern in the U.S. news media's reporting of Iraq casualties that some people find troubling. So this past week, Mark Weisbrot published a provocative column that accused the U.S. media of being in denial over what he calls a Holocaust in Iraq.
Over 1 million people killed in a country of 36 million people. I think it's fair to refer to it as a Holocaust. People refer to the Rwandan genocide, for example, as a Holocaust, and that was about the same number of people as this.
The administration does not want to say, does not admit that 1 million people were killed because of its unjustified war against Iraq, and the media does not want to admit that it failed in its role as the fourth estate. It certainly not played the role of the fourth estate in the lead up to the war, and even in the follow-up.
The Iraq War, the reasons for starting it, the way it's been fought, how long it will last, is the biggest news story in the world. And there is no more contentious angle to the coverage than how many Iraqis have lost their lives and whether the world is being told the full story. Our Global Village voices now on the huge discrepancies among the media in their reporting of casualties in Iraq.
The Iraqis in general are angry about the casualties they give, in fact, and angry about the media. In fact, the media in general is not sympathetic with the Iraqis. Literally, every one of my friends, relatives, they have casualties in Iraq, and no one could tell what is going on exactly in Iraq. So, therefore, we feel this frustration.
I think the Lancet figures, when they first came up, were widely reported, but they were widely reported from the angle of them being controversial. So the approach taken by the media was to focus on their controversiality rather than to focus on what they could say about the nature of the conflict.
It will be diplomatically, politically disastrous for the United States to acknowledge the real figures of the casualties, because after all, they went into Iraq in order to liberate the Iraqis and promote democracy, not to commit genocide in the name of the American people.
If you have issues about the way news stories are reported in the world's news media and would like to be one of our Global Village voices, email us at listeningpost@aljazeera.net, and we'll find a way via webcam or even phone video to get you on the air. Our News Bites section this week starts with a story from our Now They've Gone Too Far file. A staged proposal of marriage on live TV in Spain has turned tragic. Questions are being asked at the Catalan TV station Antena 3 about how a man with a history of domestic violence was allowed on a popular talk show called Patricia's Diary. The man was reunited with his ex-girlfriend and surprised her with a proposal of marriage. She refused, and 5 days later, police say, he turned up at her apartment and murdered her. The producers of the show, which attracts more than 2 million viewers in Spain, have condemned the killing. The head of the Associated Press has spoken out against the imprisonment of an AP photographer in Iraq, who the U.S. military arrested 19 months ago, but who has yet to be charged. The AP says Bilal Hussein was arrested after he took photographs of Iraqi fighters. Hussein was part of an AP team that had previously won a Pulitzer Prize for its work in Iraq, and the agency claims that that may have made him a marked man. The news agency says it's now convinced the U.S. military doesn't care if Hussein broke the law. It just wants to keep him off the streets and away from doing his job. Those pesky Egyptian bloggers who give the Mubarak government such a hard time are not going to let the upcoming Cairo Film Festival pass without making their mark. They're planning an alternative online festival that will feature torture videos. Bloggers have exposed numerous incidents of police torture in Egypt by posting videos on the web, and one case recently led to the jailing of 2 policemen. First prize in the alternative online festival, the Golden Whip Award. And word in the Arabic blogosphere is that the authorities in Syria are not Facebook fans. Bloggers have reported the Syrian government has blocked access to the social networking site, and in the absence of an official explanation, the speculation is that the Assad government is worried that Israelis could be using Facebook to infiltrate Syrian social networks. According to the head of a Syrian human rights group, one of Syria's prisons now has a special section reserved for internet political criminals. And News Corp Supremo Rupert Murdoch says if it was up to him, Sky News, the channel he owns in the UK, would be much more like Fox News. Fox is ideologically aligned with the Bush administration and is blamed by many Americans for being instrumental in starting the war in Iraq. But there are laws in Britain that require broadcasters to be impartial, so the Fox model would not fly there. In other words, UK law means that Sky News must be fair and balanced. Now, where have we heard that before? Coming up after the break, South Africa, HIV/AIDS, and the battle between the government and news media there.